perspective, dumping of fish is also regarded as a fisheries crime in our legislation. It's all about how you define it in your own legislation. But for us, that is also part of that. On the issue on how to bring this forward, I believe that we already have what we need to bring it forward. I don't have the text of the last Talk at Sea resolution in front of me, but we came to an agreement with those countries that have been skeptical to these discussions. And I believe maybe the wording is not completely correct, but there is a reference to transnational organized crime at sea with a significant impact on the marine living environment. And that is dumping of toxic waste at sea, and also illegal fishing or fisheries crime. So that was sort of the what's called the compromise that we reached during the negotiations. And also, I believe that UNODC, they feel confident that it is part of the wildlife crime program. So in my view, the best that we can do now is basically to take advantage of the opening that we have. And because one thing is to develop new instruments and to define fisheries crime. I don't think we need to define fisheries crime. I think that is more a matter of criminology. How do you define environmental crime, for example? Do you need a clear definition of that? I think, in my view, I think it's a waste of this forum's time to do it. I think what we need is that we're dealing with criminal issues relating to the fishing industry, and that UNODC have some tools that can be used, and let's start with that. And then, along the way, we will maybe see that here we need some improvements. Maybe then we have to discuss it further. And so, in my view, what is urgent? It is two things. One thing is for us as countries to have a discussion about these issues within the framework of UNODC. And we have already created an expert group under the Talk at Sea resolution. And in my view, that is where we should have these discussions about how do we deal with mutual legal assistance in cases at sea. How do we deal with how does the law of the sea fit with the UNCLOS Convention? All of these issues, that has to be discussed between the countries, but we are not there yet, because as I said, this is the first purely fisheries crime meeting that we have in Vienna. But if UNODC is going to work on these issues in the future, or more on these issues, then we as countries also have to give the appropriate input into these processes. Now, I don't think we necessarily have to do it through resolutions, but we have to fill the resolution that we already have with something that is related to this. So to get this expert meeting going, I think is very important. The second thing is that the wildlife crime program and also the maritime crime program, they are ready to work on these issues. But all of this costs money. And that's the reality. So in my view, what we need is more political engagement on this. Unfortunately, there are many countries, not unfortunately, but there are many countries that have a clear political motivation to work against IUU fishing. But my experience is that that doesn't mean that they support organizations that works on fisheries crime. That is the reality. And that is the same with my own country. I spent a lot of time to create the political awareness that we need to support organizations like UNODC and Interpol to work on these issues. Because the FAO and RFMOs is not enough. We have to support them too, but it's not enough. So very usually, when you have an IUU strategy that is based on a political level, it doesn't include UNODC or Interpol or the criminal justice system. But it should be. But in Norway, we have it separate, those strategies. So, so that is something that we have to bring back to our own countries, to say that this is an opportunity that we cannot miss. It is a unique opportunity to start a process on these issues in the CCPCJ through the expert meeting, and also to empower the Secretariat of UNODC to actually start working, and to start working with you as member states to improve your ability to cooperate with other countries in these cases. Interpol is already there. This is not something theoretical. We have been doing this now for 3 years through Interpol. There have been many operations. There have been operations all over the world against illegal fisheries crime and criminal groups involved in this. And also, as mentioned, the cases from the Southern Ocean outside Antarctica. That was an Interpol coordinated operation. And we took out 4 vessels in different jurisdictions. And there is also prosecutions, not only of the people involved in the vessels, but also the company behind that owned all the vessels. They are now facing prosecution and trials in their home country. They have never set a foot on those vessels, but they are the ones that are benefiting from it. And that is where we are moving. But in my view, it is a dangerous situation where you only have the operational level that have the sufficient funding to work on these issues, without having the normative level to be able to create good policies and to have this room for discussion between countries. Because what we see is that many of these cases are extremely complex, and it involves many different countries. And also in the Fisheries Crime Working Group meetings through Interpol, gradually the last meeting I had in South Africa a couple of weeks ago, it becomes more and more political. And that is against the mandate of Interpol. That is not what they are supposed to work on. These discussions should rather be here and try to find a consensus and agreement between the countries. So my suggestion is, let's work with what we have. We have a secretariat that is motivated to work on this, so we have to support this. And I think that should be the main focus of what we are going to do. Yeah, so I think I leave it by that. Thank you.
Thank you. Kaya, please.
Thank you. I'll be brief because I think we're coming up against our time. But I think there are several points I'd like to make. Firstly, we need as you said, need to make the most of what we've got, and not spend too much time inventing things, rather be pragmatic about the number of tools that we have and how to make them better. I also think, just from a Vienna perspective, from what I've observed in the time that I've been here, and I think we've talked about this over several years, is that we have a public relations and a convincing exercise to do here. And I think there are 2 questions that need to be answered for any country that wants to push this forward in Vienna. I think there's probably more, but the 2 main ones that I can see are, one, how it fits into the UNTOC. It may seem self-explanatory for many of the countries in this room, but it's not for everybody. So making that case really clearly, I think, is important. A definition is one way to do it potentially, but I think getting caught on that could potentially open up some space for those who just want to get the issue stuck in negotiations. So we all know Vienna. We could spend several years on that, and that would not be to our advantage, I don't think. So making that case really clear, how it fits in on talk and talking about it, and also talking not only to those who potentially have a different point of view, but also talking to those in the middle who just don't really know the issues very much. And secondly, I think another question that needs to be clearly answered is why it's needed. Now, the issue of illegal fishing, IUU fishing, is clear, but some of the figures around that probably are not widely known. But also why there are gaps, like where the gaps are. What are the gaps that we're trying to fill by taking this action? I think that's another message that needs to get out there and a question that needs to be answered if we're going to move forward.
Thank you, Kaya. Next part, Samson.
I would like to respond my colleague's statement from Oman actually. Because of the nature of IUU fishing is transnational, beyond border, and we had a discussion with the legal department of FAO. It's an idea of the application of the principle of extraterritoriality, which is also introduced by Singapore in responding haze problem in Asia. And also in the United States, there is a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and also in UK similar act. So I would like to ask your response actually, but maybe later in the discussion, further from Gunnar and also from friends from UNODC.
Thank you, Sanderson. I think we run out of time. We have to stop here. I do not intend to summarize the discussion. I think we have a lot of ideas put forward by the panelists and also by all of you here. But there are several views I think worth mentioning. First, there is a commonality that illegal fishing or illegal fisheries or fisheries crime is transnational issues, transnational crimes that have to be solved internationally. No one can solve the issue nationally. Secondly, illegal fishing is a predicate of crime. There are many crimes associated with illegal fishing, such as money laundering, trafficking in person, people smuggling, fraud, and so forth and so on. Third issue, the international cooperation is necessary. There is a framework mentioned by several of us about the UNTOC as a framework, also law of the sea and other conventions. But there is still challenges to face. There are challenges that we have to face to solve, such as how to bring it up, this issue forward to the UN level, how to do more to make the international community aware of this issue, and so forth and so forth. I think that's all I would like to mention. To conclude, I would like to extend our gratitude to the panelists for their excellent and thought-provoking presentations, and also to all of you for your contribution during the discussion. We will have a lunch break. The lunch is served for everybody here. I think in front of the next room, just go right from this room. So the meeting is urgent, and should please come back to this room at 1:30. Thank you. There was a suggestion to come back to the room at 2 o'clock instead of 1:30. Yeah. Thank you very much.
It will take 7 minutes to confuse you more. So thank you very much to the government of Indonesia for this, Your Excellency. Thank you very much, sir, and the entire team from the embassy. One, for hosting this meeting, and two, for really raising the topic. As Gunnar said, I think this is the first time that we have a fish crime only meeting in Vienna, whether it is or is not within the framework or within the under the auspices of UNODC. So this is really a welcome event, and well, we're very happy to be here. We have, I believe, we have a lot to offer. Maybe at this point, not a lot to say, but I think the fact that you have two global programs here, the global program on wildlife, and then my colleague Siri on the other side here, on the global program on maritime crime, demonstrates the interest that the office has to address the issue of fisheries crime at sea, or fisheries crime in general. I manage what is known as the Global Program on Wildlife and Timber Crime, and we very much go along the lines of the CITES, with respect to the fact that for us wildlife does include fish, and although there's a number of statements and resolutions that don't allude specifically to fish, we take them to include the issue of fish, and we move in that direction. So for us, it's aquatic and terrestrial species falling within the definition of wildlife. Now, why is UNODC involved? Well, clearly, I think most people on the global program are conservationists at heart. Yeah, we love all sorts of animals, but our job at UNODC is to address transnational organized crime, and that's the way we look at it. We look at a number of TOC crimes, as many of you colleagues who we work with on an almost daily basis know, and arms, human trafficking, drug trafficking, you name it. This is just one more of those crimes, although what we're talking about here is a finite natural resources versus other commodities that perhaps will be around for a heck of a long time. So there's a little bit more of an urgent need really to address this issue. So it doesn't matter whether it's ivory or narwhal tusk or abalone or the Tetwaba bladder. For us, it's an organized crime. It's something that we have a mandate and a responsibility to address. And we will keep the issue alive on the political forum as long as the member states allow us to do so. So we have a number of instruments. They've been mentioned, the UNTOC and the UNCAC. We have a number of mandates coming through resolutions. The resolution in 2013, the resolution in 2014. We have the recent resolution from the General Assembly of July, which talks about illicit trafficking. And I think everyone who was involved, those who were involved in one way or another in supporting or involved in the negotiations of that resolution, understand just how difficult it was when the issue of fisheries came up. But I think thanks to a number of very concerned member states and very persistent member states, the resolution went through for the first time ever, a standalone resolution in the General Assembly talking about illicit trafficking in wildlife. And then we have a number of other declarations and resolutions that, again, not directly related, not directly mentioning fish, but we have the Paris and the London and the Brazzaville Declaration, and we'll have the Vietnam meeting at the end of 2016. We have the very important Standing Committee of CITES, and those of you that may have been or heard about the last Conference of the Parties of CITES, a majority of the conversations were around the organized nature of what's happening within the framework of CITES. So I think it's a very relevant issue, and again, I think this meeting here is very timely. It's clearly a maritime security threat. I think we'll hear more of that from our colleague Siri, and that was particularly alluded to by the Secretary General in 2008 when he identified illegal fishing as one of the 7 main maritime security threats, highlighting the link between illegal fishing and transnational organized crime. And clearly, it's a barrier to sustainable development. 2 of the 17 SDGs adopted by the UN just several weeks ago, aimed to protect the oceans and the people who rely on them. So again, it's tied to so many different issues, and it's founded on a number of principles that the international community has identified. Now, the scope and the scale, I had a couple of slides on that, not slides, but points. But I think everyone understands what the scope and the scale and the magnitude is. It's clearly, as was demonstrated by our colleagues in the first panel, and by the very nice PowerPoint slide from our colleague from Indonesia, it's associated with so many different crimes. So it's cross-cutting. It involves so many different criminal organizations. And just like wildlife and forest crime, it is a very good crime to be in, because the chances of getting caught are low, and your rewards are super high. So as a business model, it's really a good thing to do if you're a criminal. So the money involved is astronomical. I have it here from the 2014 Interpol UNEP report that they estimate that it's worth between 10 and 40 billion US dollars. That's a significant amount of resources, and we all know that these resources go to finance other nefarious activities, impacting negatively on state security, on economic development, on social development. So really, these criminal organizations are out to make a lot of money and to further destabilize and to complicate the development of our countries. And I think that in itself, the fact that it generates so much illegal profit oriented to illegal transnational organized crime organizations is clearly why UNODC should be involved, and as Gunnar alluded to, has started to get involved in one way or another. And I must stress that we have not been as involved in the issue of fishery crime because, one, as I said in my intervention earlier, we were unable to get member states to really allow us to focus on it because they clearly didn't understand how this was relevant to UNODC's mandate. And I think that's slowly becoming clear now that why UNODC is a natural UN agency to get involved. It's transnational, there's no doubt. You saw from the presentations earlier. We were in Mexico a few weeks ago, and Mexico has a clear example of a recent example of a fish called the tuaba that some of you are aware of. Actually, there was a big article in Newsweek magazine. I think we brought it, but nevertheless, they have clearly identified syndicates from Hong Kong and mainland China as being directly related to the trafficking of this fish, which generates a whole bunch of illicit profit, but it also impacts on other species that get caught up in the net. So there's many negative impacts that come from one single act. So that's just an example of the transnational nature, and there are many others that our colleagues have alluded to. It's organized crime, so it's theft, which is disguised as commerce. Yeah, the commercial fishing trawlers operating under flags of convenience, landing their catches in ports where it's not recorded. It's basically engaging in what we would term grand theft. And again, let me go back to the vulnerability of a number of these member states to a number of associated crimes. Yeah. It was alluded to earlier also that most of these associated crimes are indeed criminalized. I think most countries have criminalized fraud. Yeah. Money laundering is a predicate offense to a number of issues. Some of what we want to criminalize may or may not be predicate offenses to money laundering. But the fact is that there's so many ways that member states can address these crimes if we were simply able to improve international cooperation, use mutual legal assistance, use extradition, do better investigation, use the wonderful tools that member states have to detect, for surveillance, to identify and to apprehend some of these boats, conveyances, and some of these criminals. That I think we could actually make headway. There's nothing new in addressing the fisheries crime issue that we had to invent. We need to use the same tools that we use to address drug trafficking, arms trafficking, human trafficking. The tools are there. What we need is political commitment, Now, the problem is it's a big sea. I totally understand that. The description this morning about, you know, the second longest coastline in Indonesia, or the amount of territory that you know, Norway has to patrol is indeed a great challenge. But you know, we have the tools, and slowly I'm seeing the commitment. What we need now is member states to really step up to the plate and to provide those agencies, whether it's ILO, FAO, UNODC, Interpol, whomever, the political support and the financial support to really go out and build capacity, judges and prosecutors, of law enforcement, support better intelligence gathering and leading into operations, but ultimately the issue of investigation and prosecution, because that's where we fail. You know, one thing is to catch the trawler and take the fish or get paid back the money that it's worth. The other really is to put these folks in jail, and we all know from other crimes that that's where we normally fail. And we can't forget the issue of corruption. Corruption is rampant. It is the number one fomenter of these crimes. Yeah, and I think, you know, the issue with fish crime is that many people don't see how fisheries crime can be a crime. Yeah, and that's something where, again, we need to work on raising the awareness, not only of our colleagues but our decision makers and those folks who work on the ports, and we need to provide the police the ability to talk to folks who are on the boats, giving them, you know, some sort of comfort that they will be put back on these boats and shipped off, and then you know, killed at sea for having spoken to the authorities. There's so many elements of this chain that we really need to address. We have a number of tools, as I said, not only the UNTAC, but we have a number of support tools in the office with respect to mutual legal assistance. One of the tools that we've been using recently at UNODC to look at the issue of wildlife and forest crime, and again, for us that includes fish, and the countries that we've worked with for the most part also view it that way. We've done toolkit assessments of interest to this subject in Mexico, Gabon, Peru, and Bangladesh. And in each of those toolkit assessments, and what I mean by toolkit assessment is we go to a country, we look at the criminal justice and preventive nature of what they're doing to address wildlife and timber crime. So what is it that's happening in their country at that time with respect to organized crime? And each of those four, we've done many more, but these four are really relevant to the discussion on fish, have highlighted negative impact and the importance of addressing fisheries crime through a number of different channels. But what it's done is that it's placed the issue of fishery crime on par with other crimes in the wildlife or terrestrial species sphere. So they're not seen as different; they were seen as being the same. There were a number of challenges that I think are relevant to our discussion, and it's what a couple of the colleagues mentioned earlier. And they're not unique to any one country. Yeah, they came up repeatedly in the toolkit exercises that we did. I mentioned 4 countries where fisheries crime was front and center in the analysis. However, we also have done this in Vietnam, we've done it in Nepal, we've done it in, there's so many countries we've done it in. Congo, I forget, but we've done it in lots of countries at this moment. And there's a number of challenges and a number of recommendations that are very, very relevant. And they're very difficult to address, yet they need to be addressed. But there are ways, until they are addressed, to tackle the crime, such as legislation. So I don't know about the word is parity, but the complementarity or identifying the gaps between the Convention on Lawless Sea and the UNTAC. Very, very important to move forward on the legislative front. The fact of criminalizing this issue, whether or not it needs to be criminal to address it, is one point of discussion, but it's something that was highlighted in the toolkits. the lack of coordination amongst enforcement agencies. Now, I'm saying nothing new because I think all of you recognize that these are the same challenges we face in addressing drug crime, but these are the ones that came out from expert assessments. So how do we get these agencies to work together? And how do we get Customs and Port Authority and the Marine and the Navy to work together? When oftentimes they may not understand the impact that fishery crime has on the development of their nation. Because I think Norway is very advanced. They're able to quantify exactly how much that catch was worth. You know, there's countries that never get to know what they've lost, and some countries simply can't assess the costs. Or some countries, the corruption is so high, they don't want to address it because, you know, it's coming back to someone, to line someone's bank account. The limited training, constant rotation of staff who should be working in the field. Some states have well-equipped patrols. Some don't. Many don't. You know, when you have one patrol ship patrolling 5,000 square kilometers of ocean, you know, that's it's very difficult to make headway. We hear of priorities all the time, and many member states have identified this as a priority, but you know, priority needs to trickle down. In this case, on the water, in many cases, or at ports. And again, corruption. Next week in St. Petersburg, for those of the colleagues that will be there, our colleagues, us with our colleagues from the anti-corruption section at UNODC will be hosting a side event. The first time ever that the issue of wildlife, again, include fishery, will be on the agenda of, it's a side event, but it's still going to be front and center at the UNCOC, at the Conference of the Parties of the Convention Against Corruption. We'll have the CITES Secretary General, we have some colleagues from Kenya, from GIZ, our Executive Director will open it, and I think that demonstrates UNODC's commitment to address the issue. The Executive Director Fedotov has made it clear that any crimes against any environmental crimes related to TOC are of critical importance and they should be addressed. So what works? Well, strengthening legislation. But if we can't do that yet, there are other mechanisms that we can bring to bear. The enforcement, investigation, as I mentioned earlier, we have to do better investigation. We have to follow the chain. Without this, we're going to be perpetually following, or perpetually running into cases where our investigators can't produce cases, judges don't have good cases, and these criminals go free. We need multi-agency task force, both at the ports and on the water. We need better cooperation between marine patrols, Navy, Army, Coast Guard, whatever the case. They need to work closer. Functions need to be very much delineated. Everyone needs to know their roles and responsibilities. And we need to continue, I think, you know, beating away on the floor of the CCPCJ or in events like this, that this is a crime that needs to be addressed. That's what we commit to do until a member state tells us we have no business doing so, but hopefully they'll have a good case, yeah? Because again, for us it has all the hallmarks of transnational and organized crime. So, I have a couple more slides here that I wanted to present, but I think I said everything before I start confusing everybody. You know, in talking to my colleague Siri, you know, the programs are very committed, but we need to learn from you all exactly what it is that we heard it from Gunnar, but what other member states would like UNODC to do, how you would like us to approach the issue. What are some plans to move the issue forward at the CCPCJ? Again, there are member states who attend the forum who do not recognize fish as being within the definition of wildlife. And as long as that continues, we're going to have a challenge to bring the whole commission forward together. So I'm hoping that we're able to come up with a better, not a definition, because I understand the intergovernmental process for a recognized definition, but a better understanding of what it is we talk about when we talk about this crime. Yeah. And presentations like those from the colleague from Indonesia go a long way in really putting it, in nice graphic charts, what it is we're talking about. And this is what we need to do on the floor of the commission. And I hope that if indeed we ever do come up with a special resolution or some other more formal document that we're able to report on its implementation, and in the plenary, really explain why it is we cannot turn our back on criminals who are destroying our seas, our environment, and plundering our fish just to make some money. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have to say from the global program. We remain committed to support your government and other governments, and we hope to hear more about how member states would like you and ODC to engage the subject. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation and also for the support for the government of the state. Next, we have Ms. Siri Bichern to have the presentation. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Excellency, friends of fish, I call you. Thank you very much for organizing this event. I think it's very pertinent and a very interesting forum, and also for inviting you, ODC, to speak and to explore further how we can work together in order to tackle the issue. I represent the Global Maritime Crime Program, and I thought I would give you a background to the program more globally, and then where we fit when it comes to fisheries crime, and what we have done so far and where we want to go further. So initially, the Global Maritime Crime Program was called the Counter-Piracy Program, and it was in response to the Somali piracy. It started already in 2009, and was a response in Eastern Africa. We have the biggest team. I'm based here at headquarters in Vienna, but we have a big team of approximately 40 working out of Nairobi, and that's due to the Somali piracy issue that started. Now, we've been supporting Kenya, Mauritius, and Seychelles in prosecuting piracy, so it's been a land-based response. But there has been no successful attacks on the high seas in the Indian Ocean for the last years. So we have developed the program basing on some of the lessons learned and the expertise we have developed under that counter-piracy program to develop into a global maritime crime program. And that's responding to all types of crime occurring at sea that falls within the mandate of UNODC. And that should include fisheries crimes as well. Now, that being said, we haven't done much in that area, but we have one activity which I will report on now. I don't know if it's worth mentioning what kind of support we've been providing. As I said, it was a land-based response, so supporting criminal justice systems in these three countries I mentioned. In parallel, we've done capacity building in Somalia. And we have evolved quite a lot and still continuing to do maritime law enforcement capacity building. I think that's quite key with regard to fisheries crime. So we have a big program going on in Somalia where we training Coast Guard, Maritime Police in patrolling their seas and being able to operate and defend and control their TS, basically. We do this globally as well, and it's an approach we're doing also in West Africa. So I think this is one component where we can respond to fisheries crimes as well, making maritime law enforcement operational. So one of the, we continue doing, there's no new transfer of suspected pirates, but we continue supporting the member states who've been prosecuting when it comes to appeals. There's still ongoing cases. So that's one component we focus on. Though as part of the development we've done, we have gone into establishing something called the Indian Ocean Forum on Maritime Crime. It's probably difficult to read this, but I will explain what it contains. It's a response to what our research department called the Southern Route, which is opiates, heroin going out of Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and following the sea route through the Indian Ocean. We partner with something called the Combined Maritime Forces based in Bahrain, and they have done a lot of heroin seizures over the last years. We had an event organized in Vienna 2 years back, 1.5 years back, where we looked into how the response to that could be. Currently, there's been boarding by naval forces and throwing narcotics overboard, but whether there also could be a prosecution response to this. We're not yet there, but wondering whether we can build on the piracy prosecution model. Now, piracy is in a unique position because it has universal jurisdiction. It's different with narcotics, but we looked into other components on how we can cooperate in this regard. And one of the areas that were mentioned was to do better coordination among coastal states. So we came up with this forum, and it has 6 different subgroups, whereas illegal fishing is one of them. I won't go into the others, but just to mention it's herring trafficking, smuggling in, or migrant trafficking in people, piracy, Somali charcoal, and then wildlife and forestry crime. These are divided into ministerial and technical. We have yet to have the ministerial meeting, but we have done almost all, with the exception of Somali charcoal, on expert level. And on illegal fishing, we had the first meeting in the Seychelles last week, which Gunnar mentioned. Okay, so here we just mentioned some of the goals of the IFMC. It's basically to have a network created where coastal states in the Indian Ocean can cooperate, coordinate, share information, but also work closer together on a more technical level and operational level. And we also include a capacity building component to it, as well as a prosecution network. So the overall aim is really to prosecute the offenses. So when it comes to fish, we have the first meeting in the Seychelles. Last week, it was in partnership with something called Secure Fisheries and the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission. It was a quite specific focus when it comes to illegal fishing of tuna in Somali waters, but it has also a broader component of discussing how member states can cooperate better together, and what are the challenges and the way forward. As mentioned here, we also had some service states, those being Germany, Norway, and the UK, as well as observer organizations listed there. This one concentrated on the Western Indian Ocean, but the aim is really to include Eastern Indian Ocean countries and maybe use this forum as an example of how we can develop something similar globally. So this is really the first step in trying to have a more global approach. So, talking about the first activity we have done within the area of fisheries crime, this forum had then 2 days to discuss among member states what are the challenges, how can we take it forward, how can we cooperate better. And there were certain outcomes which I wanted to list. It's difficult to see the next slide. I will read them out. One, and I'm very happy to see that based on what's been discussed this morning, the same areas are the ones identified during this meeting. So one is really to strengthen domestic control of vessels flying their country's flag. So flag state control and monitoring. I think that was mentioned earlier today. The improved ability to patrol by sea and air. Air surveillance is also quite key. You would think that you only focus on the sea element and boats and vessels, but also air surveillance would help when it comes to detection and control. In brackets you see electronic means. I guess it's a quite costly element to this as well, and how we can improve there, maybe do cooperation among member states and so on when it comes to control. I want to skip the next one because I think it was probably relevant during the meeting, but it's not so much for you and OTC probably to follow up on. The next is really to have national legislation, and that goes back to what Gunnar mentioned on normative element and working on drafting on legislation and criminalizing fisheries crime. And then mentioning of the UNTOC, which will be our entry point in getting involved in this. The last element was, through this forum I mentioned, to establish interagency cooperation. Based on the experience I had working with on maritime security more broadly, and fisheries crime come up in all, be it in Western Africa, Eastern Africa, and Asia, is really an area that there's a request to address further. But based on the more broader maritime crime experience, the coordination among entities that needs to be involved in order to prosecute these offences is key. And that applies not only to regional cooperation or global international cooperation, but also nationally, domestically, to have entities work together. So as you see on this part, it says the Attorney General, Coast Guard, Aviation, Customs, Revenue, Fisheries. All these entities are somehow involved in the full chain of fisheries crime in responding to it. And there's a need for those entities to talk together in order to actually reach the prosecution. So those are the main elements, and I'm happy to see that those also work nicely with what was already brought up here. Now, this was the first activity that UNODC GMCP organized on fisheries crime, hopefully not the last. As I said, we're aiming at having the next focusing on the East and Indian Ocean, but also hopefully globally beyond the Indian Ocean as sea. Second meeting there is one activity that I hope to see in the future. The other activity is, as Gunnar mentioned previously, a follow-up to the resolution and the EGM mentioned there. Have a contact group on Talk at Sea, but with a specific focus on fish. Now, whether it's possible to get a resolution mentioning fish specifically through CCPCJ as one measure, it's not necessarily the overall aim, but it would probably facilitate UNODC's work, but at least to have a contact group come together as long as there's funding for it. Currently, we have partial funding, but we're aiming at having the first, or it's actually the second because we already have one, but the one that's more specific and responding to the 2013 resolution early next year. So those are what I see as very specific activities that GMCP can get involved in the near future. But hopefully using a forum like this and working together, we can come up with additional activities. But to echo what Hoppe said, we would be interested to get an indication also from you as a group where you want to see UNODC more involved and what kind of activities you would like us to initiate. I guess there's a lot of talk of relevant areas that where UNODC has a mandate that links into this, corruption being one, mutual legal assistance, money laundering, and so on. But I guess we also need to talk about the basis of legislation, how we can cooperate on more technical and maybe more advanced areas as well. So happy to hear your feedback and where you see us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sini. Next is Jessica Pitt. You have the floor.
Thank you. First of all, please let me thank you, and in particular, of course, the government of Indonesia, the Mission of Indonesia, for organizing this focus group discussion, and also for inviting WWF to speak on this important issue. WWF is a global conservation organization, and our mission is to stop the degradation of the planet's natural environment, to allow humans to build a future where we can live in harmony with nature. It might sound a bit wishy-washy, but really it's about the world's natural resources and how these can be sustainably managed for the future in order to achieve sustainable development. I want to start with a very quick overview of WWF's work on IUU at the global scale. We're working to shift governance efforts to modernize the regulatory framework within which fishing sits, focusing on rule of law and bringing in a set of rules on licensing and crew safety to reduce the scope for IUU to occur. We also work on market mechanisms to try to prevent illegally caught fish from entering supply chains. We work at the FAO, we work at the IMO, we work at the UNGA, at RFMOs with coastal states and market states, but also with market actors, businesses. But what we've discovered is that apart from fisheries management tools, market tools, we also need something extra to counter and curb the activities of illegal fishers. And to stop this crime and the effect it has on people's livelihoods. I was going to list a few of the activities that we are doing on the fisheries management side, but I think I'll skip over that and get straight to the point around the fisheries crime aspects for this audience. So we are here today to discuss fisheries crime, in particular transnational organized fisheries crime. I'd like to start off with what might be obvious for all of you, just with a couple of statements. Illegal fishing is clearly a subset of IUU, and transnational organized crime is clearly a subset of crime. For me, at least, it's important to set that out in this context, that not all fisheries crime is by nature transnational and organized. In essence, you can divide fisheries crime into three distinct areas from a government perspective. Firstly, what the government's nationals do at home. Secondly, what these nationals do abroad. And thirdly, what other states' nationals do at home. So what foreigners do in another state's waters. Transnational organized crime is the two latter of these categories, and also includes those responsible for or benefiting from these crimes, regardless of where they might be located. Much crime is national, committed by nationals in their home jurisdictions, including on vessels flying the flag of their home state, but in another state's waters or on the high seas. It is important that governments review national legislation to properly address what their own people do within their jurisdiction as one step towards a common understanding of what fisheries crime is in the transnational organized crime context. So firstly, I believe that states have to establish which offences should be criminalized and which should be made serious crimes, and so have the potential to invoke international cooperation in bringing to justice those responsible for and benefiting from these crimes. What WWF would like to see at the end of the day is a global network of domestic legislative arrangements where the definition of what constitutes fisheries crime and the means of deterring this via criminal sanctions are universalized, so that any fisher, owner or beneficiary can be got at in whatever jurisdiction they are in, regardless of where their original criminal activity occurred. And this is why we need a shared understanding of what offences need to be criminalized and what is to be regarded as a serious crime. One key element for ensuring that fisheries crime is deterred and ultimately wiped out, and several participants have already mentioned this, is to include offences regarding what I call paperwork issues. I'm not a lawyer, so I use maybe other terms at times, such as forged licenses and import certificates, tax offences, etc. Just like these are today used as secondary legislative offences for crimes such as money laundering, people arms and drugs trafficking. The political driver for WWF in making seriously bad fishing behavior a serious crime is the fact that these crimes undermine economic growth and social well-being in many developing countries, such as was described for Indonesia, for example. And they affect those people that tend to have no or little political voice and are abused by foreign unscrupulous operators. This bad behavior has adverse consequences just as serious as those related to trafficking of people, arms and drugs, and we believe they should be treated in a similar way within countries' legal systems. I think that some years ago, a lot of the issues around fisheries and bad fishing behavior and associated crime was written off in many places as it's just fish, it's something on the side. But we believe that these days are long gone, and I'm really happy to hear here today that there seems to be an emerging, if not consensus, or at least an emerging thought, view, that this is indeed so. That to erode the resource base upon which communities and individuals depend is a serious matter. Several people have alluded to the Sustainable Development Goals. As world leaders gathered last month in New York to adopt the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, action around fisheries crime is even more timely. I'd like to just quote from the introductory text adopted at the summit. We envisage a world in which every country enjoys sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth and decent work for all. A world in which consumption and production patterns and use of all natural resources are sustainable. One in which democracy, good governance and the rule of law, as well as an enabling environment at national and international levels, are essential for sustainable development, including sustained and inclusive economic growth, social development, environmental protection, and the eradication of poverty and hunger. Eradicating fisheries crime is a prerequisite for this vision to become reality. Universalizing the nature of and enforcement over fisheries crime are key steps in closing the net around fisheries criminals. As a contribution to the discussion around fisheries crime, we produced a report on universalizing jurisdiction of a marine living resource crime in 2013, and the authors, Professor Martin Semeni and Greg Rose, presented this report at the Interpol Fisheries Crime Working Group meeting in Nairobi later that same year. In its recommendations set out options that various actors, both states and intergovernmental organizations and regional agencies might take to ensure that there is nowhere to hide for fisheries crime perpetrators. Some listed out as priorities for WWF, and some of them have also been mentioned here, are a potential to negotiate a protocol to UNCLOS, making sure that national laws have appropriate extraterritorial reach, covering nationals wherever they are, including on the high seas. Criminalizing related crossover crimes, such as those I covered earlier, such as incomplete, falsified paperwork, etc. And also making corporations criminally liable for activities they're responsible for. They are nationals just like we people are, and regardless of where their headquarters might be. Sorry. The Committee on World Food Security's high-level panel of experts, in their report launched at FAO COFI last year on sustainable fisheries and aquaculture for food security and nutrition, starkly set out the need for action on this global problem. It recommends that fish is given a central position in food security and nutrition strategies, and in particular that small-scale fisheries are fully recognized in any program around fisheries governance. For WWF, it's very important that any move towards criminalizing fisheries offenses is done with large-scale organized fisheries crime in mind, and especially those who would take food and livelihood away from others. And I'm heartened to hear the discussions here today have focused on those kind of criminal behaviors and those actors. But in discussion with governments and industry, and also listening to the discussions by delegates here today, it's clear that perhaps before moving ahead to introduce fisheries crime as part of the transnational organized crime agenda at the international level, a common understanding of the problems and what we're actually talking about is needed. I'm therefore pleased to let you know that we're discussing a non-governmental meeting together with UNODC to discuss how we can respond best to fisheries crime, including as serious and transnational organized crime. Whereas WWF is active in promoting flag state responsibility, a global record for fishing vessels, and the prompt entry into force and universalization of the FAO Port State Measures Agreement and the Cape Town Agreement on fishing vessel safety as key elements in a comprehensive strategy to ensure sustainable fishing, including stopping IUU. We also stand ready to support states as much as we can, being an NGO, in universalizing legislation to appropriately establish fisheries crime and relevant crossover crimes. This was a very short expose of what WWF does, the way we are looking at these issues. I look forward to working with you going forward and other interested states and actors to make this a reality, the ambition we have, I think all of us here, for the future of the people and our children and so forth. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jessica. So we have 3 panelists already present their presentations. Now the floor is open for questions, comments, or maybe responses from the audience. All right. Okay. Let me start. Okay, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question from Siri. I learned from your presentation that there is one meeting in the IOMFC fisheries crime, which is concentrated on the region of Western Indian Ocean. Is it possible that the same kind of thing also happening at the region of the world? For example, Pacific Ocean, for example, a couple of countries in Pacific Ocean. And if that is the case, what will be the requirement for countries in the surrounding area to be able to at least do some same thing exercises like what you did with countries in Western Indian Ocean? Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, as I said, this is really the first step we've done in order to deal with fisheries crime, and it's a subgroup to this International Forum on Maritime Crime. And as I mentioned as a background, it was really a response to initially drug trafficking in the Indian Ocean, and the specific request from coastal states to have someone facilitate the coordination and cooperation and create networks. So that was a specific response, but yeah, absolutely. UNODC would be, and my program, the Maritime Crime Program, would be happy to support other member states in creating something similar and using this as sort of a best practice or lessons learned and how to implement. It doesn't necessarily need to tackle the same crimes. These were areas that were identified by member states to be of major concern and based on studies we conducted. But that could vary from different regions. We're also been discussing whether to do something similar in the Atlantic and with focus on Western Africa. So you mentioning Pacific, absolutely. If there's a request from member states to do something similar, we can base it on what we have learned so far of establishing this in the Indian Ocean. So I'm welcoming such an idea, but we work upon member states' requests. So if there's an interest, definitely.
So if I may have a follow-up question on this.
Yeah.
Just one thing. Is there any requirement for a number of states, or which I can start with a couple of countries, like 2 or 3?
Sure.
Not necessarily
Yeah,
all of
we
the
don't
countries
have
in the region.
no. And
Because
I think
when I see the result of your meeting, it is very useful. I mean, you have 5 pillars or something like that.
Yeah.
It is actually the platform for cooperation for the region. And I think this is really answering the necessity in the region. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm trying to find out if you try thinking out loud with
Sure.
this model.
more than happy to brainstorm, and we don't have any requirement to have a specific number of member states to request such a thing. If there's an interest among a few, and then in such a forum as we are now, there are several states that can talk together and maybe initiate something, and we can take on the facilitating role to make it happen.
In your previous meeting, do you happen to produce something that, not many countries has well equipped with their national legislation. Maybe some countries have problems, but